Chicago staying in it. Natasha Cloud. And right before the break, this was the scene inside Wintrust Arena. After Natasha Cloud got that bucket, she wanted her voice.
Damn league. They don't get it. They just don't get it. They wonder why their league isn't respected. They wonder why no one takes this toxic turd seriously. Somehow, the lovely Sophie Cunningham is being blamed for Natasha Cloud's emotional meltdown last night.
Enes Kanter thought he was simply showing support for Sophie Cunningham, but what happened next turned a WNBA game into a full-blown controversy. Natasha Cloud lashed out, Kanter found himself at the center of a heated argument, and then, right in the middle of the game, security reportedly stepped in. But what exactly happened behind the scenes, and why did Kanter's response make this situation even bigger?
What happened tonight?
What happened tonight? Good question. So I was literally out there. I mean, I'm a huge fan of basketball, a huge fan of the third quarter. And Sophie Cunningham shot a three. And I put my hands up to celebrate, right? Literally a couple positions later, Natasha came back and started screaming and yelling and said, "She's not going to sleep with you." And I was like, I am not trying to sleep with her. I'm just here to protect women and support her.
With one controversial shirt, the stage was already set for tension inside the arena, although nobody could have predicted that the situation would soon escalate into a confrontation involving Natasha Cloud and arena security.
Of course, these players are triggered because they want, by God, men to be allowed to compete in women's sports. They literally want to destroy their own sport. Enes Kanter and Royce White are trying to make a point because the WNBA refuses to define clearly what a woman is. He was wearing a shirt. Woman, noun, adult, human, female. He wore that shirt. This was Natasha Cloud going at Enes Kanter last night.
What he probably did not expect was for a WNBA player to march directly toward him in the middle of the third quarter, point in his face, exchange heated words with him, and trigger a scene so chaotic that security eventually escorted the former NBA center out of the building.
According to Chris Williamson, also known as Sergeant Simp, this dude seems to be desperate for the attention of WNBA players. He is constantly shooting his shot on Twitter, hoping to be noticed by the ladies. Of course, like most WNBA players, Chris Williamson misses 100% of the shots that he takes. According to the sergeant, Sophie Cunningham is so gross. Ew! Her irrational fear of men wanting to borrow her thongs has been detrimental to our precious league.
And then, because this is modern sports, where one basketball game can somehow transform into a political debate, a social media war, a courtroom argument, and a reality television reunion all before breakfast, Enes Kanter Freedom immediately had a response. He said he had been kicked out for supporting women.
Natasha Cloud found some way to make last night's game all about her. As the Chicago Sky are getting crushed in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, Natasha Cloud decides to crash out on a fan courtside. That fan was wearing a shirt that said woman on it. And Natasha Cloud couldn't bear the sight. All the horror. So Natasha Cloud starts approaching this was a woman sitting courtside. Natasha Cloud starts approaching this female sitting courtside and starts going off, screaming at them, cursing at them, yelling at them. And somehow this female fan is the one that gets kicked out.
But Natasha Cloud clearly saw the situation very differently. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos was Sophie Cunningham, whose own comments about transgender participation in women's sports had already placed her at the center of a national argument long before Kanter ever took his courtside seat. So what exactly happened when Enes Kanter Freedom and Natasha Cloud collided during the Indiana Fever and Chicago Sky game? What did Kanter say happened before security removed him? Why did Cloud's teammates immediately rally around her? Because once you look past the shouting, the pointing, and the security escort, the story becomes even stranger. The game itself was already loaded with enough drama to keep basketball fans busy. Indiana defeated Chicago 113-90, with Caitlin Clark delivering 37 points and 10 assists while knocking down 8 three-pointers, and Kelsey Mitchell adding 30 points. It was the kind of performance that should have dominated the conversation after the final buzzer, especially considering the Fever's explosive second half and Chicago's elimination from playoff contention. Instead, one of the biggest stories from the night involved a former NBA center sitting along the baseline. That former NBA center was Enes Kanter. Kanter had arrived at Chicago's Wintrust Arena wearing a black shirt with the words "woman," noun, adult, human, female. The message was not random, and neither was his decision to attend a Fever game.
Enes Kanter is going about this in a weird way, but he's actually doing a service to women to protect women. And the audacity of people going against him to protect y'all is nuts to me. Natasha Cloud ran up to Enes Kanter in the middle of the third quarter because he had a shirt on that said "woman." Now, like, he's in support of women for women in sports.
For weeks, the WNBA had been dealing with intense public debate surrounding transgender athlete eligibility after Sophie Cunningham openly stated her belief that biological males should not compete in women's sports. Cunningham later emphasized that her position was about protecting women's sports and did not come from hatred toward transgender people, but her comments still generated significant backlash and support. The issue became even more complicated when Kanter and former NBA player Royce White publicly declared themselves eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft, presenting the move as a challenge to what they argued were unclear eligibility rules. At the time, the league also said there were no immediate eligibility matters affecting the WNBA, and there was no known transgender woman currently playing in the league. So by the time Kanter walked into Wintrust Arena, he was not simply another celebrity sitting courtside hoping the camera would find him. He was carrying a controversy with him. And apparently controversy had purchased a very good seat. According to the sequence described by multiple reports, the confrontation erupted late in the third quarter after Natasha Cloud scored inside with 1:22 remaining. A timeout was called, Cloud celebrated with teammate Aicha Coulibaly, and then she turned toward Kanter's location along the baseline.
A lot on last night's incident involving Natasha Cloud and Enes Kanter. He showed up last night to the Chicago Sky Fever game to support Sophie Cunningham and the Protect Women's Sports movement. He hung out with the rally outside. Damn near got attacked by Chicago Sky fans out there. Of course, they were belligerent and very vulgar, as was Natasha Cloud. And this has gotten deeper and deeper.
What happened next immediately changed the atmosphere. Cloud walked toward Kanter, yelling and pointing in his direction. Kanter stood up with his arms extended and moved toward the edge of the court before security, and several Chicago players stepped between them. He was then escorted away from his courtside seat. Just like that, what had been an ordinary regular season basketball game suddenly developed an entirely different storyline. Natasha Cloud was still in uniform and emotionally charged from the action on the court, while Enes Kanter was standing along the baseline after openly showing support for Sophie Cunningham and the position she had taken on the debate surrounding women's sports. The WNBA schedule can tell fans who is playing, where the game is being held, and exactly when the opening tip will take place, but it does not usually come with a warning that a former NBA center might suddenly become one of the biggest storylines before the fourth quarter even begins. Yet that was exactly what happened, because once Kanter was removed from the arena, the basketball game became only one part of a much larger conversation. Kanter quickly took his argument to social media, where he said that he had been kicked out of a WNBA game for supporting women. He later provided a more detailed account of what he believed had happened, explaining that the confrontation began after Sophie Cunningham made a three-pointer, and he celebrated her basket. According to Kanter, Natasha Cloud then approached him and began shouting, which led to an increasingly heated exchange before security eventually intervened and removed him from the arena.
So let me get this straight. Natasha Cloud, within the span of a week, uses a homophobic slur. Then she goes back and forth with a fan courtside, gets the fan kicked out, and no punishments for Natasha Cloud. Folks, in any other league, if you use a homophobic slur during a press conference, you're getting fined, at worst, suspended. Folks, in any other league, if you're screaming at a fan courtside, especially an innocent female fan, if you're screaming at that person courtside, there's going to be some punishment coming down from the league.
That, of course, represents Kanter's version of how the situation unfolded, and it is important to distinguish his personal account from what can be independently confirmed through available video and major reports. The footage clearly shows Cloud approaching Kanter during a timeout, after which the two exchanged words before Kanter stood up and moved toward the court. As the situation became increasingly tense, players and security personnel stepped in, and Kanter was eventually escorted away from his courtside seat. However, Kanter's response did not end when he left the building. His removal from the game immediately became another major talking point for supporters, who believed he had been punished simply for expressing his opinion. His critics, however, interpreted the situation in a completely different way. From their perspective, Kanter had deliberately placed himself inside a WNBA game while wearing a message connected to an already explosive cultural debate, making it difficult to separate his appearance from the controversy that followed. They argued that his presence was not simply an act of quiet support, but part of a broader political demonstration that was always likely to attract attention and potentially provoke a reaction. That is where the story becomes considerably more complicated than a simple argument about who shouted first. The same incident can look entirely different depending on which side of the controversy someone already supports.
Man, how y'all don't get that? And I see a lot of people coming out about what Enes Kanter is doing. Like, there's a lot of black men, oh, you treating our women. He's actually on your side, you morons. You are fighting against what he's trying to protect that y'all want protected. Women playing against women in women's sports. It's no hate towards trans women. Like, this has been stated numerous times, and this started with the Sophie Cunningham.
Kanter sees himself as defending women's sports while supporting Sophie Cunningham for expressing a position that generated significant backlash. Cloud and many of Kanter's critics, meanwhile, view his actions as part of a broader effort to bring a highly divisive political and cultural debate directly into a professional basketball arena. Chicago Sky head coach Tyler Marsh strongly defended Cloud following the incident, making it clear that the organization stood behind her. He praised her willingness to stand up for her teammates and for the people she believes deserve protection, while also arguing that people attending WNBA games should be focused on enjoying the competition and respecting the athletes on the court. That response revealed something important about the entire controversy, because this situation was never likely to end quietly once Kanter walked out of the arena. Some people argued that Kanter had been punished simply for expressing support for Sophie Cunningham, and for her belief that women's sports should be reserved for biological women. Others argued that Kanter was not merely an innocent spectator caught in an unfortunate confrontation, but someone who had intentionally positioned himself at the center of a political demonstration, and therefore could not be surprised when his presence generated controversy. Meanwhile, there was an awkward and almost ironic reality at the center of the entire situation. Sophie Cunningham, whose earlier comments had helped ignite the debate surrounding Kanter's appearance, was simply doing what she had come to the arena to do, which was play basketball.
Honestly, when I first saw this, when I was watching the game live, I only saw it from Natasha Cloud's point of view, like the camera that was following her, and I was nervous. I was like, oh no, like who is she getting into it with on the Indiana Fever? Like there's bad blood between these two teams. Like what happened? And then the camera pans and she's going off on Enes Kanter, who was sitting courtside. Now when she starts walking towards him and kind of telling him off, he stands up, puts his arms out, and starts walking onto the court. Like he takes a step onto the court. That was the reason he was ejected. I'm seeing so many people saying like, oh, he shouldn't have been ejected. Like, what did he do wrong? He walked onto the court. That's what he did wrong. Like that is, that is basic courtside etiquette.
She did not walk toward Natasha Cloud to start an argument, and she did not stop the game to confront anyone about the controversy. She also did not require a security escort or become directly involved in the confrontation that unfolded near the baseline. She had made a three-pointer, and according to Kanter's account, his celebration of that basket became part of the sequence that eventually led to the confrontation. Sophie Cunningham makes a shot, Enes Kanter celebrates from courtside, Natasha Cloud takes exception to something connected to his presence or actions, and suddenly a basketball game is interrupted by a confrontation that requires security intervention. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark had delivered the type of performance that would normally dominate the conversation without much competition. Her 37 points and 10 assists should have provided an obvious headline, particularly after she connected on 8 three-pointers during Indiana's victory. Yet after the game, Clark said that she had not seen the confrontation involving Kanter and Cloud, while Lexi Hull also indicated that Kanter had not said anything to the Fever players during the game.
interesting in this situation is I believe that WNBA player, in my opinion, should have brought that energy from day one when the WNBA said what they said about men playing in women's sports. But in my opinion, Enes Kanter Freedom isn't the first man to try to play in women's sports. Didn't men already succeed with that? Where were you? It's almost like people only speak up when the world is going to appear to be behind them. To me, that's not bravery. To me, that's just falling in line.
Kanter has provided his own explanation and has maintained that his support for Sophie Cunningham and his position on women's sports were central to why the confrontation occurred. Cloud, on the other hand, did not provide the same detailed public, play-by-play explanation of the verbal exchange in the reports surrounding the incident. As a result, the larger sequence can be documented, but the precise conversation between the two cannot be reconstructed with complete certainty from the available public evidence. That uncertainty has not slowed down the controversy. If anything, it has made the argument even larger, because both sides have been able to interpret the confrontation according to their own understanding of what happened and what it represented. Cloud remained with the Chicago Sky and received strong support from her coach and teammates, who defended her response and her willingness to confront a situation she clearly found objectionable. Sophie Cunningham remained connected to the broader controversy because her earlier comments had helped create the political environment surrounding the incident, even though she was not the person who confronted Kanter. The WNBA, meanwhile, once again found itself dealing with a conversation that stretched far beyond basketball. Perhaps the most unusual part of the entire story is that Kanter had already become a symbol within this debate before he ever entered the arena.
You would be proactive about how we can get in front of this in case it does happen. But you are starting a non-starter because of your moral high road when you are morally bankrupt. This is a you problem. I'm talking to that person who is watching this right now, who is cheering on Enes Kanter's sidebar. Who is this? Who is this person with this credential who is clapping? And to me, it looks like he's clapping for Enes, because the more agitated Natasha Cloud becomes, the harder this individual claps. If this individual is supporting Enes Kanter coming to a WNBA game for no other reason than to antagonize Natasha Cloud, snatch his credentials.
Natasha Cloud was clearly not interested in simply ignoring Kanter's presence, and her decision to confront him created the moment that many people will probably remember long after the final score has faded from memory. The biggest question, therefore, is no longer simply whether Enes Kanter was right or whether Natasha Cloud was right. The more significant question is what happens when political and cultural arguments follow athletes, activists, and public figures directly into professional sports arenas. Can an athlete express a controversial opinion without becoming the target of a much larger national argument? Can a fan or former player publicly support that opinion without transforming the event itself into a political demonstration? Enes Kanter Freedom clearly believes that his removal from the game answered those questions in a troubling way, because he has continued to frame the incident as punishment for supporting women and defending his position on women's sports. Natasha Cloud and her supporters clearly see the situation differently and believe that her confrontation with Kanter was a response to what they considered an inappropriate or provocative political message being brought directly into their professional environment. The Chicago Sky stood firmly behind Cloud, while Kanter continued standing behind his message.
Sitting courtside, say it was a male NBA player, and I stood up and walked on the court and went like that, I would also be kicked out of the arena. Now, there is an argument to say, like, maybe Natasha Cloud, if she didn't start yelling at him, then there wouldn't be so much attention on all of this. And I think a lot of us are trying to just ignore what is going on, but I don't blame her in this situation. I really don't. We don't know what he was saying while sitting courtside. There are some fans who were sitting courtside saying that he was chirping the players for the entire game. There's other fans sitting courtside saying that he wasn't saying anything, like he was just sitting there watching the game. He said that he was just simply celebrating a Sophie Cunningham three-pointer, which also doesn't track because she didn't make a three-pointer.
Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham remained committed to the position she had expressed from the beginning of the controversy, which is her belief that biological males should not compete in women's sports, while also maintaining that her position does not come from hatred toward transgender people. The basketball game eventually ended, but the arguments surrounding it continued to grow because the confrontation had become much larger than the few minutes during which Kanter and Cloud exchanged words. Ultimately, the WNBA did not simply witness a heated exchange between a player and a former NBA star. It witnessed what can happen when an already explosive cultural debate enters a professional sports arena, collides with the emotions of a live game, and is immediately handed over to social media, where every second of footage becomes evidence for one side or another. Whether the next chapter brings another confrontation, another public statement, or an entirely new controversy remains to be seen. What is already clear, however, is that after everything that happened that night, nobody is likely to look at the scoreboard as the only thing worth watching.